read stories. I like to tell stories. I like to have stories shared. I really love stories, especially ones that captivate me all the way from the beginning to the end. Like the story I heard once about a gentleman that entered into a monastery. Now, he had to take a vow of silence, and he was willing to do it to better himself. But when this year was done, he had the ability to write at least one word on the chalkboard in front of the head monk. Well, the first year was pretty excruciating. It was tough, but finally he was able to take the chalk and write in front of the head monk the word "the." The second year came, and it was even harder for him to keep silent. But he did, and the second word day came around, and he took the chalk and he went up to the board and he wrote the word "food." And the head monk for the next year kept looking at those two words, the food, the food. But that's all right. And so the third year came around, and by this time the third word day came up, and the monk decided that, the initiate decided that he was ready. And he picked up that chalk and almost kind of with a smile on his face and a bit of resignation, he wrote the third word, "stinks." And the head monk looked at the initiate and says, "You've been here for 3 years and all you've done is complain." Oh, I love a good story. And I especially love it when it ends well. This Lenten season, we're going to experience something a lot of fun. And also, I think, quite educational. Because we're going to learn a concept that is only unique to the Gospel of Mark. Now, what I'm about to share with you, I know that many of you have read these stories. I know that many of you have come across these messages and wondered, what in the world is going on here? What is a concept that is called the Messianic secret? And you've read them, you've tried to figure out what's going on, and I'm here to tell you that Mark is really unique here. The other Gospels do not include this concept of the Messianic secret. And to give you an example, and I know that you're familiar with it, you just don't always connect it with the Messianic secret. Let me give you an example here at Mark 3. Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him. Hearing all that he was doing, they came to him in great numbers from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and the region around Tyre and Sidon. He told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, so that they would not crush him. For he had cured many, so that all who had diseases pressed upon him to touch him. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and shouted, "You are the Son of God." Now, I'm guessing that when you read this passage, until you get to the next verse, you're thinking, "Great, this is wonderful, this is all what we should do." But here's the secret. But he sternly ordered them not to make him known. What? This doesn't make any sense. I mean, I think the question we should be asking is, why? Why in the world does he say this? I mean, doesn't this go against our evangelistic fervor? Shouldn't we be standing on the rooftops and shouting out Jesus' name? Shouldn't we be getting on the street corners and talking about Jesus? Shouldn't we be telling everyone, "You are the Son of God"? What is with this secret? Well, as I said, you've recognized the Messianic secret, but you didn't quite know why Mark includes that here. So, the reason why it is a secret is we have to wait until the end. Because when you get to the end, you are going to see the Gospel of Mark in a very different way. You are going to figure out what's really taking place here. And I'm going to make a very bold statement. That when we get to the end of the story, and the reveal is going to take place at Easter, you are going to not only know what the Messianic secret is, but you are going to go to your next door neighbor and say, "Let me tell you about the Messianic secret." Because it's a lot of fun. Now, with all stories, to get anywhere, to get to the end, as the children pointed out, you have to start somewhere. And we are going to start, as the title of the message for today, we're going to start right here. Now, we have not gone back to the very beginning of Mark 1:1, and that's the reason why we talked about that passage just a few weeks ago. But we're going to be talking about really where Mark begins his message, his gospel. And Eleanor is going to share with us, starting at verse 9. Yep.
Yes, I'm reading from Mark 1, verses 9 through 15. Not long afterward, Jesus came from Nazareth in the province of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. As soon as Jesus came up out of the water, he saw heaven opening and the Spirit coming down on him like a dove. And a voice from heaven, "You are my own dear Son. I am pleased with you." At once the Spirit made him go into the desert, where he stayed 40 days, being tempted by Satan. Wild animals were there also, but angels came and helped him. After John had been put in prison, Jesus went to Galilee and preached the good news from God. "The right time has come," he said, "and the kingdom of God is near. Turn away from your sins and believe the good news." Thus ends the reading.
Thank you. Now, and this is not a rhetorical question. Feel free to shout this out. We are right at the very beginning of Mark. And if you know your other gospel stories, what is missing? The birth of Jesus. Exactly. The Christmas stories are not here. There's no angels. We don't have the three kings. There's no nativity. Seeing all those things that we think about. I mean, Matthew and Luke really hit that. That's right at the very beginning. In fact, Matthew and Luke, they even have the genealogy stories of Jesus. John actually goes even farther back. He talks about that he equates Jesus with the Word, which is going all the way back to say that Jesus is creation itself. So he's even gone farther back. But Mark starts right here with Jesus' baptism. In fact, we've missed about 30 years of Jesus' life. This might be kind of strange. Why does Mark start right here with baptism? Now, I was baptized as a baby at the Davenport United Methodist Church. My dad was a pastor, and so the district superintendent came and baptized me. One of the things that I found, because I was baptized as an infant, I have no memory of my baptism. But in some churches, there are places where people are baptized as adults or as youth. And we're going to see kind of a funny video about what might happen if you baptize some youth members. So go ahead and share this. especially the good stories that keep us reading all the way to the end. But I'm sure each one of us here has read those stories that are boring, that just do not make any sense. And what do? Is we take the book and we put it down. We think, I can't finish this. Or maybe it's a TV show or a TV series. Think, there is no way I can get to the end of the story. But that's not what we find here in the Gospel of Mark. Mark is a great storyteller. And as I said, is very unique. Matthew and Luke and John do not include these things. And so what does Mark do is that he is trying to get us to the end of the story as quickly as possible. As I talked about, it will be revealed on Easter Sunday morning. And so what does Mark do is Mark gives us some hints to kind of keep us reading, to kind of keep going on, because he doesn't want us to lose interest. And one of the hints I'm about ready to share with you is something I think we can all relate to, and that is pain. Let me share with you a story about pain and baptism. St. Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland. Good job. All right, so there we go. And there's a great story about St. Patrick. Patrick loved to evangelize. And he loved to preach about the gospel. He loved to teach people about Jesus and Christianity. And he had these great stories of him wading out into the water and baptizing people that he had instructed. And so he would carry this crozier, and you can see it right here. This is a crozier. And so one of the things he would often do, he'd go out to the water, and when he would have an initiate, he would slam that crozier into the ground, and he would baptize the people 3 times. Well, there's a great story about baptizing a chieftain. And Patrick knew this was a big deal. If he could convert this chieftain will go back to his village, with his understanding and knowledge, would then convert all the other people in that village. And so he was so excited and maybe a little bit nervous, because when that chieftain waded out into the water, St. Patrick, he slammed that crozier into the ground and baptized this man 3 times into the water. Now, St. Patrick went on to baptize another person, so he didn't quite see it, is that when the chieftain walked back, he kind of had a limp. He didn't see what happened, and one of the associates did. And so after the baptism was done, went up to Patrick and says, I think you injured the chieftain. I think you slammed that crozier right under his foot. Patrick was horrified. He had meant no disrespect to this chieftain. So he went to him right away and he says, I am so sorry that I injured your foot when I was baptizing you. Why didn't you say something? And the chieftain says, well, I remember you telling the stories about Jesus' pain and the nails that went in the hands. I just assumed that pain and baptism went together. Baptism. Now, for some of you, this might seem like an unusual place to start the story of Jesus. As I said, we don't have these cute Christmas stories. We don't have the nativity in the stables. But Mark, he's got none of that. For him and his listeners, what is important is the end of the story. You've got to get to the end of the story. It's all about Easter. And everything Mark can do, all the storytelling techniques to get us to Easter, is what is vitally important for Mark. And so and why? Because that's where the elusive answer of the messianic secret will be revealed. And this is what we're going to do during this season of Lent. We are going to go through the book of Mark as it was intended. We're going to hear hints and little subtle suggestions of why this gospel is not only unique, but why we got to keep on reading and why we got to get to the end of the story. And this is why Mark starts with baptism. It doesn't have to do with all the other fluff, because this is what is important. You've got to get to the end of the story. So each of the lessons that we have here are going to build upon another. We're going to learn something exciting, something captivating, something that I'm going to tell you is going to knock your socks off. Because when we understand why Easter is so important, then and only then will all of these lessons during the season of Lent will make sense. And then you will understand why Jesus had to keep this secret until Easter. So, this is why we're starting here. So let me give you another hint. And it has to do with pain, but kind of added on to that is that Jesus understands our pain. Walter Wagerin is a fantastic storyteller. I love reading his books, but he writes a lot of fiction. But one of the things that he tells is a story about his 7-year-old son named Matthew. Matthew's in the 2nd grade, and Matthew, when he was in the 2nd grade, developed an affinity to comic books. And one day he went to the library and he stole a couple of comic books. Sorry, Bev, sorry, Lois, that's just what the story goes. And so when Walter found out about this, he scolded his son, said it was so bad, corrected him, disciplined him, took him back to the library, and had the librarian do the same thing. Said, this is wrong, you do not steal. Well, Walter thought the story was done, and so the following summer, they were on vacation, and Matthew stole a comic book from a resort gift shop. Walter corrected him again, told him it was wrong to steal. A year later, Matthew again stole some comic books from a drugstore. And at that point, Walter knew he had to do something. And so he takes him into his study and says, Matthew, I have never spanked you before, and I don't want to now, but somehow I've got to get through to you to help you see that it is wrong to steal. So Walter bent Matthew over and spanked him 5 times with his bare hands. Matthew's eyes moistened as he looked at the ground. Walter then looked at his son and says, I'm going to leave you for a little bit, and I'm going to go to the other room. So Walter says that he goes to the other room, and he couldn't help himself. Cried like a baby. He, the dad, bawled and bawled and bawled. After washing his face, he went back and talked with his son for just a little bit. Many years later, when Matthew was just about ready to graduate high school, him and his mom were talking about stories of childhood, and they talked about that whole incident with the comic books. And Matthew said to his mom, he says, you know, I never stole another comic book, and I will never steal again. And his mom said, it's because your dad spanked you, right? And Matthew said, no, it was because I heard my dad cry. Kids remember when their parents cry. I've had those moments when I've disappointed my parents. I've seen that look on my kids' face when they have disappointed me. I still remember when my grandpa passed away. He was a dear old grandpa. I loved him, and a little Cora Leipold was sitting right next to me. And I remember sitting there during the funeral service, and they came across the slideshow. And I looked up, and I saw a very young and healthy Harold Landon. And then the picture then turned to him holding each of my daughters right after they were born. And I couldn't help it. I just cried. I cried like a baby. And I remember out of the corner of my eye, Cora just kind of looking up at me the whole time. And after the funeral service, I said to Cora, I said, why were you watching me during the funeral service? And she just said to me, she says, because I've never seen you cry. Our children don't see us cry very often, but when they do, they remember. Grief, pain, and suffering, uncertainty about the future, worry. I wish we didn't have to go through these things. I wish that we didn't have to turn on the TV and hear about another mass shooting. I wish we didn't have to turn on the radio and hear that the stock market has had another volatile day. I wish I didn't have to get all these fake news stories in my Facebook page. I wish I would wake up in the morning and not ache so much. I wish. But in the words of one of our dear old parishioners who was in the nursing home I visited this week, she said to me, such is life. This week, I heard a wonderful interview with a woman who was a professor at Duke Divinity School. And she just recently wrote a book that the title of it really captured my interest. It is called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. Kate Bowler has just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Here is a brief excerpt of what she told the interviewer. Married in my 20s, a baby in my 30s, I won a job at my alma mater straight out of graduate school. I felt breathless with the possibilities. Actually, it's getting harder to remember what it felt like. But I don't know if it was anything as simple as pride. It was certainty, plain and simple, that God had a worthy plan for my life in which every setback would also be a step forward. I wanted God to make me good and make me faithful with just a few shining accolades along the way. Anything would do if hardships were only detours of my long life's journey. I believed that God would make a way. I don't believe that anymore. At this point, the interviewer kind of transitions and asks her about her cancer. And she says, well, I'm moving from the crisis phase to the chronic illness management phase. So now I get scans repeatedly instead of having regular treatment. And it requires a different kind of mentality. Before, it felt like it was alarm bells all the time. And now it's just sort of a distant alarm sound and a general sense of anxiety. And then she said, well, I have incurable cancer. So the hope is that it just doesn't grow. And the treatment I'm on keeps it at bay. I'll tell you, when I heard that story, I thought of the hint that Mark wants us to focus on. And I'm going to share with you a different version than what Eleanor read. This is from The Message, a paraphrase by Eugene Peterson. And this is how he interprets this passage immediately after Jesus' baptism. Along with the Spirit, a voice, you are my Son, chosen and marked by my love, pride of my life. At once, this same Spirit pushed Jesus out into the wild. For 40 wilderness days and nights, he was tested by Satan. Wild animals were his companions, and angels took care of him. Pain and suffering are right there from the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. As soon as he was baptized, he was thrust into the world and faced what we face every day. And that's the hint. Pain and suffering are part of our walk with Christ. Grief hits us with a smell, a memory, and we just break down and cry. Being a disciple for Jesus Christ means that we will face these struggles day in and day out. And walking with our Lord means that things will not always be easy. And that is why we need to focus on the end of the story. Because if we keep reading, we will see that the greatest man that ever lived went through what we go through. We will experience his suffering, his pain. We will gain a sense that life is not always easy. But if we focus on the end of the story, which is Easter, this year it's April 1st, then Mark tells us we will have a reason for hope. We will have something to look forward to. And on that incredible day, we will understand why pain and suffering and depression are all part of life. On that day, we will understand the full picture of what it means to understand the messianic secret. For only in waiting to understand the whole story do we need to understand why we have to start here and start with the one who understands us more than we ever know. One final story. This little boy looked at the pet store window and she saw the sign and it said puppies for sale. So he walked in and he saw the 5 of the cutest looking yellow lab puppies he'd ever seen. And they were yiping and they were jumping over each other and they were having a great time. And the little boy looked at the pet store owner and he says, how much are the puppies? And the pet store owner said, some are $50 and some are more. So the little boy kind of reaches into his pocket and he's got a bunch of change and he counts it and he says, well, I have $1.47. And the pet store owner says, well, I'm sorry, son, you don't have enough money, but we will always have puppies in the future. You save your money and you can buy a puppy. So with that, he kind of puts the money back into his pocket. And as he's doing so, the pet store owner's wife comes back with a puppy. And it's just as cute as the others, but when she put it down, it didn't walk right. It had this limp. And the little boy looked at the pet store owner and says, what's wrong with that puppy? And the owner says, well, that puppy we just got back from the vet, it doesn't have a hip socket. And so that puppy, I mean, he's gonna walk with a limp all of its life. He's just gonna be lame. And the little boy kind of looks at the pet store and says, "Oh, I wish I had the money to buy that puppy. That's the puppy I want." And the pet store owner says, but son, you don't want that puppy. You know what? I'll give it to you for free of charge. You go ahead and take it. And with that, the little boy says, "No. That puppy is worth all the same amount of money as all the other puppies," and hands him $1.47 and says, "I will give you this now, and I will give you 50 cents for every month until that puppy is paid off." And the owner is kind of perplexed about this. I mean, "Son," he says, "you don't want this puppy. It's not going to be able to play. It's not going to be able to run like all these other puppies. You're going to have to tend to it all the time." And with that, the little boy kind of picks up his pant leg, and shows this crippled, twisted leg with this really ugly brace on it. And he says, "Mister, I don't run and play too good myself. I figure this little puppy is going to need someone like me who understands it." My friends, this is our story. And it starts right here. It starts with an understanding that Christ knows us better than we know ourselves. As we go through this rough and tumble experience of life, we can be assured that if we keep reading, as we keep focusing on the end of the story, Jesus knows our pain, Jesus knows our suffering, Jesus knows our moments of grief and despair. But as we focus on Easter, we can be assured that Jesus understands us all too well. So, stay tuned to the end of the story.